Commander Vexistar of the Galactic Defense Coalition had seen many battlefields across 17 different star systems. He had witnessed the ferocity of the crystalline shard warriors, the tactical brilliance of the aquatic depth dwellers, and the technological supremacy of the synthetic construct armies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was witnessing on the forest moon of Kepler 438b. The human colony ship New Dawn had crash-landed on this remote world 3 cycles ago, carrying roughly 800 settlers seeking a new home beyond Earth's overpopulated solar system. What they found instead was a world dominated by creatures that defied every known classification of fauna in the galactic database. The shadow maw stood 12 feet tall at its muscular shoulders, its obsidian hide rippling with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a predator's heartbeat. 6 eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, tracked movement with predatory precision, while razor-sharp claws, each longer than a combat knife, scraped against the crystalline ground. Its maw, lined with rows of serrated teeth, could crush a hover tank's armor plating without effort. This particular shadow maw had been stalking the human settlement for days, picking off livestock and terrorizing the colonists. The Coalition's xenobiology team had classified it as an apex predator, intelligence level, moderate threat assessment, extreme recommended response, orbital bombardment. But orbital bombardment wasn't an option, not with 800 human civilians scattered throughout the settlement below. "Sir, the creature is moving toward the residential sector," reported Lieutenant Zarath, her mandibles clicking nervously as she monitored the tactical display. "The humans have established a perimeter, but their weapons are inadequate." Commander Vextar nodded grimly. Human technology was primitive by galactic standards. Kinetic projectile weapons, crude energy, shields, basic armor plating. Against a shadow maw, they might as well be throwing stones. "Deploy the containment field," he ordered. "We'll have to wait." The voice belonged to Dr. Ketharin, the Coalition's leading xenopsychologist. Her 4 eyes were fixed on the main viewing screen, and her usually calm demeanor showed signs of confusion. "Commander, you need to see this." The tactical display shifted to show the settlement's central plaza. The shadow maw had indeed breached the perimeter. The scattered remains of barricades and the groaning wounded testified to that. Human defenders were falling back, their projectile weapons sparking harmlessly off the creature's hide. But in the center of the plaza stood a small figure, a human child, no more than 6 or 7 years old by galactic age standards, stood directly in the shadow maw's path. She wore a simple blue dress and clutched what appeared to be a primitive textile toy, some kind of stuffed animal representation. "By the void," whispered Lieutenant Zarath. "Why hasn't someone pulled her to safety?" The answer became apparent as the camera zoomed in. The human adults were shouting, reaching toward the child, but some invisible barrier seemed to prevent them from approaching. Not a technological field, something else entirely. The shadow maw had noticed the child too. Its 6 eyes locked onto the small figure, and its bioluminescent patterns shifted to an aggressive crimson. The creature's massive haunches tensed as it prepared to charge. "This is it," Commander Vextar said quietly. "Ready the neural disruptors." "We can't let—" The shadow maw exploded into motion. 12 feet of muscle, claw, and fang launched itself across the plaza with enough force to level a building. Its roar shattered windows 3 blocks away, and its claws left deep gouges in the crystalline ground. The human child didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled and opened her arms. What happened next would be studied by xenopsychologists for decades to come. As the shadow maw reached her, covering the final few meters in a blur of deadly motion, the child simply embraced it. Her tiny arms wrapped around the creature's massive neck, her face pressed against its obsidian hide, and she whispered something too soft for the Coalition's sensors to detect. The shadow maw's charge didn't slow. It stopped, instantly, completely. 12 feet and several tons of apex predator came to an absolute halt, as if it had struck an immovable wall. But there was no wall. There was only a child, hugging a monster. The creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted from aggressive, crimson to something the Coalition database had never recorded. A soft, almost ethereal blue-white. Its 6 eyes, which moments before had burned with predatory hunger, now showed something else entirely. Confusion, then recognition, then something that could only be described as peace. The Shadow Maw's massive head lowered until it rested, gently against the child's shoulder. Its breathing, which had been rapid and aggressive, slowed to match hers. One massive claw, capable of cutting through battle steel, carefully patted her back with impossible gentleness. Impossible, breathed Dr. Catharin. The neurological readings, Commander. The creature's aggression markers have completely disappeared. Its cortisol levels are dropping to baseline. This violates every principle of predator psychology we understand. But Commander Vextar was watching the child's face on the screen. Even through the primitive human facial expressions, he could see something that transcended species barriers. Compassion, understanding, and something else. Something the galactic community had forgotten in its rush toward technological advancement. Innocence. Sir, Lieutenant Zarath's voice was barely a whisper. The other creatures... Look. Across the settlement, other Shadow Maws were emerging from the forest. Dozens of them all moving toward the plaza. The human defenders raised their weapons, but the creatures paid them no attention. Instead, they arranged themselves in a loose circle around the child and the first Shadow Maw, their bioluminescent patterns all shifting to that same peaceful blue-white. The child looked up at the nearest creature, a female, judging by the scarring patterns on her hide that indicated successful breeding, and smiled. The Shadow Maw's massive head dipped low, allowing the child to scratch behind what might charitably be called ears. "My God," whispered a voice over the human communication channel. She's talking to them." The Coalition's sensors finally managed to isolate the child's words. What they recorded would change galactic policy toward both humans and apex predators forever. "It's okay," she was saying, her voice carrying the absolute conviction that only human children possessed. "Nobody wants to hurt you. You're just scared and hungry and far from home. I understand. I'm far from home too." Commander Vextar stared at the display for a long moment. Around him, the bridge crew, representatives of 7 different species, all trained warriors and scientists, watched in absolute silence as a human child accomplished what their combined military and technological might could not. She had turned monsters into friends, not through force, not through technology, not through superior firepower, through empathy. "Cancel the containment field," Commander Vextar ordered quietly, "and update the human species assessment in our database." "To what classification, sir?" The commander watched as more children emerged from the settlement, running toward the Shadow Maws with laughter and joy, while their parents followed in amazed bewilderment. The creatures, each capable of devastating entire city blocks, carefully lowered themselves to the ground to allow the small humans to climb on their backs. "Miraculous," he said finally. "Classification, miraculous."